She climbed the stairs silently, as she did every night, with the light steps of someone carrying too many secrets. It was midnight. The mansion was plunged into a heavy, almost complicit silence. His bedroom door was ajar, as if waiting for something, or someone. But when she gently pushed it open, what she saw inside made her heart skip a beat. Someone was already lying in bed. And it wasn't him. The sheet moved as if hiding something alive, something forbidden. For a second, she considered running. But instinct overcame her fear, and when she finally approached, what she discovered in that bed would not only change her life, but unearth a past the millionaire swore he had buried forever. The clock continued to strike midnight, but time, for her, had stopped. The room smelled of expensive perfume and something she couldn't name, but it ached in her chest, a mixture of betrayal and recognition. The recumbent figure turned slowly, revealing a face she never imagined she'd see there. It wasn't a lover, it wasn't a wife. He was someone the world believed was dead, and that person's gaze, fixed on the maid's eyes, said only one thing: "You shouldn't have come." The millionaire at that moment wasn't in the house, but what he hid within luxurious walls was more than a secret of forbidden love. It was a pact with destiny itself. And now, with the maid at the center of the scene, destiny would exact its share, with interest. Because those who delve into the past of the rich discover that luxury hides things that not even money can bury. If this has kept you hooked this far, just imagine what comes next. Like the video and subscribe, because this story is just beginning. The house was too big for someone like her. Each gleaming chandelier reflected a part of life that didn't belong to her, an existence made of luxury, silence, and codes only the rich understand. From the first day, the maid knew. Inside, there was no loud talking, no running, no crying. She entered. That mansion as if entering a parallel world, with a starched uniform, tied-back hair, and eyes that saw more than they should. The millionaire was a man of few gestures and even fewer words, but when he spoke to her, there was a certain care in his syllables, as if he knew the silence between them carried more than household orders. His wife lived in another state, or so they said, and the maid never saw a photograph of her around the house, only empty picture frames and books that seemed overread. Time in that mansion was made of rituals, coffee served at 8, the garden mowed on Tuesdays, and his room always locked after 11. Until that night. She arrived in the United States fleeing something only she knew, leaving behind a childhood stitched together by broken promises. That mansion was her first steady job, her first room of her own, her first warm bed. So she obeyed with devotion. But there were nights when her heart disobeyed. Like that night. Midnight sharp. A chill. That didn't come from the air conditioning, but from deep within her chest. The long hallway, lit by yellowish bulbs, seemed longer than ever. The silence of the house was loud, and as she climbed each step of the stairs, she didn't know if she was heading toward the future or the end of everything. Upstairs, the door to her boss's room was ajar, as if begging to be walked through, and she walked through, unaware that by pushing it open, she wasn't just entering a room, but a story that had begun long before she was born. She carried a tray in her hands, but what really trembled were her eyes, because something in the air announced that that night would change everything. There was no sound of a shower, no lamplight, just the dark room, the heavy air, and the certainty that something wasn't right. Her name had never been spoken aloud by him. It was always Miss, or just a brief glance. But that night inside that room, everything she was, immigrant, woman, alone, would be placed before a secret that could not be touched. Still she rang. Because sometimes destiny calls with the voice of danger, and she answered. The sound of the doorknob turning was muffled by her pounding heart. This wasn't part of her routine. It was a call from within, something instinctive, as if the floor itself had whispered, "Go." When she pushed open the door, the darkness of the room greeted her like an ancient secret. Streetlight streamed through the gaps in the curtains, cutting the space into thin, silvery strips, revealing soft contours against the expensive carpet. Everything seemed untouched, almost sacred. But something was wrong. The bed, which should have been empty, was occupied. A body stretched out, motionless, covered to the chest. She froze. The scent wasn't the millionaire's cologne. It was different, sweeter, denser, almost feminine. And there was something in the air, as if time were holding its breath. She didn't know whether to call out to him, retreat, or simply pretend she hadn't seen anything. But her eyes refused to look away. Her feet moved forward despite herself. With each step the doubt grew. What if it was a thief? What if it was her own boss, injured? What if it was no one? But it was someone. And this certainty weighed like a stone. The sheet moved slightly, not with the softness of sleep, but with the weight of someone startled awake, or of someone who has never slept. And then a sound. A long, slow, feminine sigh. She stopped. 1/2 meter from the bed. Her eyes were beginning to adjust to the darkness. Her breathing was shallow, her hands still gripping the tray as if it were a fragile piece of armor. "Who's there?" Her voice came out in a barely audible whisper, and the answer came not with words but with a slow movement. The sheet slid away. A head emerged. Black hair, pale skin. The woman's eyes in the bed met the maid's with a frightening calm. There was no fear there, no surprise, only a silent certainty, as if she had been expecting this visit. "You shouldn't have come." The words were spoken softly but sharply. The maid took a step back, but something in that presence kept her from fleeing. It wasn't the woman's face that frightened her, it was recognition. She had seen that face before. In a photograph hidden deep in the millionaire's drawer, one she should never have opened. It was the face he caressed silently, as if asking for forgiveness. But this woman should be dead. "That's what," they said. That's what he implied in his absences, in the empty wine bottles, in the long silences before the piano. Her name had never been spoken, but now, lying there, alive, with that gaze that pierced skin and time, she seemed like the loose thread of a story no one had the courage to sew together, and the maid, unintentionally, had pulled that thread. She knew that from that moment on, nothing would go back to the way it was. Not her. Not her master. Not that house. The midnight silence now screamed from within. My body trembled not from fear, but from a truth that still had no name. Because sometimes what scares me most isn't what's hidden, it's what was there all along, waiting to be seen. She couldn't move. The entire world seemed to have shrunk to fit in that room, between the two gazes locked in the darkness. The woman's in bed, serene, almost compassionate, and hers, wide with astonishment, like someone seeing a ghost and realizing it's breathing. There was no hint of madness in the stranger's expression, only something worse, tranquility. The tranquility of someone who knows too much. The maid swallowed, and her body seemed to have lost all strength. She let the tray slide to the floor, but the sound of the cutlery hitting the carpet was swallowed by the heavy silence that filled the house. That woman wasn't an intruder. She was a present absence, a shadow that now had a face. The sheet fell a little further, revealing delicate shoulders and an ivory silk dress that seemed too old to be there. She sat up in bed slowly, as if waking from a long sleep. The maid felt her throat dry. The woman's name swirled in her mind, like a secret she almost knew, but still couldn't say aloud. And then she asked, without thinking, "You are?" The woman didn't answer. She just smiled, a small, toothless smile, full of mystery. And suddenly, all the maid felt was that she was in the wrong place at the exact right time. The room now seemed darker than before. The walls seemed closer. And the perfume. The perfume was exactly the one he'd smelled on his boss's jacket once when he'd helped him take off his coat. A gesture too accidental to be innocent. It was hers. It had always been hers. The ghost he carried in his scent, in his absent gaze, on the days when he'd disappear for hours. And now there she was, flesh and blood, not dead, not forgotten, just hidden. The woman stood. She was barefoot. He walked to the curtain and opened it with a firm gesture. The streetlight flooded the room, revealing her face completely, young, untouched by time, but her eyes were those of someone who had already died inside. The waitress took 2 steps back. She felt invaded by something she didn't understand. He was afraid, yes, but also a dull anger that was beginning to form deep in his chest. Why was that woman there? Why hiding? And above all, why hadn't the boss ever told her anything? The woman, as if reading his thoughts, whispered, "He didn't tell her because lying is easier than loving." The phrase hung in the air like a sentence, and she no longer knew if that woman was a victim, an accomplice, or the very poison that was silently sickening that man. The waitress was no longer just an employee. She was a witness to something big, to something that couldn't be explained, only felt. At that moment, the sound of the front door opening downstairs could be heard. Footsteps. The boss had returned, and she was still there. In his room, facing a woman who shouldn't exist. The woman in the curtain slowly turned her face and said, "It's too late now. He'll have to choose." His footsteps echoed across the marble floor, as if each step told a story no one knew in its entirety. She knew him in that silence. He knew the weight each shoe carried. The rhythmic sound of his boss's arrival was always accompanied by a ritual. He would drop his coat on the chair in the hall, turn on the first light in the room on the left, and go. Straight to the second floor without calling out to anyone. But that night, his footsteps hesitated halfway up the stairs. And she knew. He felt it. He felt something had been violated, that the night was not like any other. The woman at the window remained motionless. She didn't seem scared, just ready, as if awaiting an inevitable confrontation. The maid now no longer knew where the line was that separated reality from delirium. Her mouth felt dry, her hands cold, and her heart beat at a rate that was no longer hers. "You need to leave," she whispered, almost pleading, but the woman replied without looking, "He owes me. It's not your fault, but you're in the wrong place in the story." It was the first time the maid felt like screaming, not out of fear but out of desperation. She was trapped between an old story and a truth that burned inside the room, even in the early morning cold. The bedroom doorknob turned, slowly, as if he already knew who was on the other side. The millionaire's eyes met the woman's at the window before he even noticed her, the maid. A second of silence, long, painful. Then a name escaped his lips, a name that had never been spoken in that house. "Evelyn." His voice trailed off. The woman turned her face calmly, her eyes filled with a suppressed sadness, a weight that had hurt for far too long. The maid felt as if she had witnessed something too intimate, as if she had invaded a temple. The millionaire stepped inside hesitantly. His face, always so cold, so composed, was now distorted by surprise, guilt, and an emotion he seemed no longer to know how to contain. Evelyn said nothing. She simply walked toward him and stopped a hand's breadth away, and it was she who spoke. "You buried me alive. Now look at me." The impact of those words fell to the floor like shattered glass. The maid backed up against the wall, unsure whether to leave or stay. But the millionaire didn't move. He stood there, before Evelyn, like a man facing his own mistake materialized. His guilt now had skin, a voice, and eyes that ached. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she just said, "You told everyone I died. You did it because it was easier than facing what you did to me." And his silence was the cruelest confirmation. He didn't deny it. He just let his eyes fall to the floor. The maid, without realizing it, held her breath. She sensed there was something even bigger there, a story within the story. Evelyn continued, "This girl," and she pointed, with her eyes at the maid, "is only here because you chose her to occupy the space where you erased me." The sentence hit like a slap. The maid didn't know whether to cry, scream, or apologize for something that was never hers. She didn't want to be in that center. But there she was, and now there was no way to leave without taking part of that secret with her. Because once you hear the name that should never be spoken, it echoes within your soul and changes everything. That same night, the Alma Maid didn't sleep. After Evelyn left the room, walking alone as if the mansion still belonged to her, and the millionaire locked the door behind him with a silence that hurt more than screams, only the echo of what was left unsaid remained. The maid sat on the floor of her own room for hours, her eyes open, her soul in a state of collision. Evelyn was alive. And not just alive. She was wounded in a way that time could not heal. What she had seen was far greater than any explanation. But there were questions. And there was a need to know. The next day, while cleaning her boss's office, a room he rarely allowed anyone to touch, something caught her eye. A drawer was ajar, as if it had been left that way in a hurry. Inside, folders, photographs, old newspaper clippings that spoke of a missing young heiress. She recognized the face. It was Evelyn, only younger, with brighter eyes and a smile that no longer carried the weight it did now. At the bottom of the drawer, a torn envelope. Inside, fragments of a letter. The words were broken, but still they screamed. "Forgive me for not being strong enough. They wanted the money, but you were what mattered to me. If one day someone finds out..." She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. Evelyn hadn't simply disappeared, she had been erased, and the letter, or what was left of it, was a stifled cry from someone who knew they would be betrayed. There was a name at the bottom of the page, written in the same delicate handwriting as someone who still loves Evelyn. The waitress felt a chill down her spine, as if, by touching that letter, she had summoned a spirit that never rested. Because what Evelyn had left there wasn't a cry for help. It was a condemnation. Later that day, her boss called her over. For the first time, he said her name, and there was no affection in his voice, only a restrained firmness. He asked her to sit down. The office light was on, only the lamp, and the rest of the room was plunged into shadows. "You saw more than you should have," he said. She didn't answer. She just stared at the man in front of her, as if staring at a statue about to crack. "She appeared to you, didn't she?" The question came softly, and in that instant, she understood. Evelyn wasn't a visitor. Evelyn was a warning. The boss stood and walked to a small safe built into the back of the bookcase. He entered a password. The metal door opened with a dull click. Inside, among documents, was another envelope, the same as the torn one, only whole. He removed the letter and handed it to her. "If you want answers, start here." She took the paper with trembling hands and read. Each line seemed like a whisper from the past. Evelyn described everything: the escape attempt, the betrayal of her own brothers for the inheritance money, the decision to disappear from the map to save her own life, and the silence bought from him, the millionaire, who chose to close his eyes to avoid losing his business. The letter ended with a sentence that seared the maid's soul. "If she ever learns the truth, perhaps she'll forgive me for letting someone like him get so close." The page fell to the floor, and with it, the image of everything she thought she knew fell, because now she wasn't just a witness, she was part of the revenge. The next morning, the mansion looked different. The hallways that once carried only the sound of her footsteps now seemed watched by ghosts, and the biggest of them was the past. The millionaire didn't leave for work as usual. He stayed locked in his office without giving orders, without asking questions, but inside him, something was stirring, and the maid knew it. She felt it, because his silence now screamed. It wasn't the elegant silence of someone with too much money to argue. It was the silence of someone who feels guilt and fear. She spent the day with a heavy heart, unsure whether to pretend nothing had happened or confront him. But that evening, while she was washing the crystal glasses, he appeared in the kitchen. No suit, no watch, just a tired man. "You deserve to know the rest," he said. And that, coming from someone like him, sounded almost like a plea for forgiveness. She followed him into the living room, where he lit a log fire and poured 2 glasses of brandy. A long silence fell, until he began to speak, and the words came like stones rolling downhill. No stopping, no turning back. "When I met Evelyn, she was the heiress to a fortune her family guarded as if it were a treasure too fragile to share. They wanted to marry her to someone elite, someone predictable. I was a new investor, too bold, too poor. But she chose me, against everyone, against everything. And for a while, we were happy, until she began to realize they were trying to take everything from her. Brothers, cousins, even her mother. The only way she found to escape was to fake her own death. And I accepted. I helped. I kept the secret. I became an accomplice. The maid listened without interrupting, without blinking. His every word was a step into a bottomless pit. He continued, "But then I moved on, or tried to. I met people. I built businesses. I made a fortune, but I never got rid of her. Evelyn haunted me even when she was far away. When you arrived here, something about you reminded me of her. The way you stare silently, the way you listen to the world. I didn't plan to get close. It just happened." The maid's hands trembled, not from what she heard, but from what she felt rising in her chest. Anger, because now she understood. She hadn't been chosen for who she was, but for who she remembered. She was an echo, a reflection, a disguised consolation, and that hurt more than any betrayal. "You can't just erase one woman and keep another as a memory," she said, her voice firm, even as her heart broke inside. He didn't answer. He just lowered his head. And in that gesture she saw. The millionaire wasn't evil. He was weak. A man who made deals with the past, thinking time would erase everything. But time doesn't forgive. It exacts its toll, and it exacts its toll dearly. That night she didn't return to her room. She walked to the back garden and cried there, hidden among the trees where no one would see. Not for him, but for herself. For believing that perhaps she could be something more than a shadow. And there, in the middle of the night, with the cold earth beneath her feet and the scent of flowers, drowning out the world, she made a promise. She wouldn't be part of any repeat. She wouldn't be an echo. She wouldn't be a replacement. If this story had to continue, it would be in a new light, even if she had to burn everything down to make it happen. She tried to pull away. She maintained her distance in her words, in her gaze, even in the way she arranged the cutlery at the table. But the past, now awakened, spread through the house like an old perfume clinging to the skin. He didn't insist. But he didn't disappear either. He lingered in the corners, watching with that mixture of guilt and desire only cowards can carry. With every step she took, there was a shadow of him. And with every silence between them, there was Evelyn. The maid, try as she might, couldn't ignore what still throbbed. Those were days of pent-up tension, tiny gestures with immense meaning. A touch of the hand as she handed him the cup, a look that lingered too long as she crossed the hallway, a heavier breath as she followed her up the stairs. Everything was unspoken yet present, as if they both knew they were on the edge of an abyss, and yet they grew closer with every passing minute. There was no more innocence, there was no more disguise, only the inevitable, and the inevitable always finds a way. One rainy afternoon, she was collecting clothes from the makeshift clothesline in the utility room when he entered without knocking. His eyes were tired, his hands in his pockets. "I need to talk," he said. She kept her back to him, pretending not to hear, but his body slowly moved closer, as if asking for forgiveness for his own mistake. "I don't want you to leave," he continued. She turned, her eyes burning. "You can't want what you've already destroyed," she replied. He didn't argue, he just looked at her with a look that begged for something not even time could give back. And then, as if it were the only way to silence the world for a moment, he kissed her. It was quick, intense, and yet so. Ancient, it felt like it had happened before. A kiss without promise, without poetry. A kiss of someone who needs, not someone who loves. She didn't respond. She stood there, motionless, feeling the bitter taste of something that shouldn't exist. And when he pulled away, she murmured, "This isn't about me, it's about her." He didn't deny it. He didn't try to convince her otherwise. He simply lowered his eyes and left the room. She remained there for hours. Her lips burned, but not from the touch, from the lie. Because deep down she had felt it too, not from him, but from everything she'd wanted to be and never was. Because there are kisses that seal more than love. They seal pacts with pain, and that kiss was an invisible seal that she was now inside the same prison Evelyn had lived in, the place between memory and the guilt of a broken man. That night, she decided to sleep in the attic, away from his eyes, but she couldn't. She walked to the piano in the living room where he used to play when he thought he was alone. She sat before the keys, unable to play a single note, and yet she pressed one, C sharp. The vibration echoed through the house like a question, and upstairs, he heard her. He didn't come down. He didn't answer, because deep down they both knew the kiss hadn't been the beginning. It was a warning, and everything that came after would be harder to erase than any scar. She didn't want to be there. The long table, the silver gleaming in the chandeliers, the guests laughing with raised glasses, none of it belonged to her. But she was invited, or rather she was commanded. "Come to dinner. We have important guests. I want you there." His voice was firm that morning, but there was something broken in his eyes as he said it, as if he needed her more than he admitted. She hesitated. Never in all the years had he sat at the table, always serving, always standing. But now, there she was, wearing a blue dress borrowed from his absent wife, her hair tied back, her heart at war with her own body. The guests arrived gradually. Businessmen, a woman with cold eyes and a French accent, a young man too young for so much power. Everyone looked at her with that air of restrained strangeness, as if trying to guess who she was. None of them asked directly, but everyone was judging. The millionaire, for his part, was visibly tense. He drank quickly, he spoke little, and whenever he looked at her, it was as if he were asking for help without words. Evelyn wasn't there, but her ghost seemed to occupy the empty chair at the end of the table. The food was served. Conversation began. The Frenchwoman asked who the young woman beside the host was. "Relative." The question came with a hint of venom and an overly elegant smile. The millionaire hesitated. The maid looked at him, waiting for an answer that would free her from her embarrassment. But he said nothing. He just smiled vaguely and changed the subject. And in that moment, she felt it. She felt alone. That in his world, she would never have a name. The stares grew. Whispered comments began to circulate like smoke. Too young to be just an employee. No last name? Doesn't sound like someone from around here. And she, silent, swallowed each word like a stone. The worst came at the end of the evening. One of the guests, a grey-haired banker, an old friend of her boss's, already drunk, approached her in the hall. "So you're the new Evelyn?" The question was a slap. Her blood rushed. She turned away and left without saying anything. But it was too late. The name had been uttered there, aloud, like a curse. She locked herself in the service room and cried until her soul ached. Not for what they said, but for what he didn't say. He had the chance to protect her, to tell her she was more than a shadow. But she chose silence. She chose the comfort of keeping up appearances before the men who lent her power. The next morning, she didn't come down. She didn't make his bed. She didn't make coffee. She lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the echoes of dinner as if she were still in that room, trapped between cutlery and judgments. The millionaire knocked on the door later. He asked her to open it, but she didn't. She simply replied, "Now I know who I am to you." And his silence, on the other end, was the most honest answer he'd ever given. The humiliation that night wasn't the stares of others. It was his omission. It was the realization that, no matter how much she wanted to, she would never stop being the dead woman's replacement, the employee promoted to illusion. And even without anyone applauding, something new was born within her, the beginning of anger, of awareness, of the end of enchantment. The house was strange, too silent, as if it breathed on its own. Since dinner, the millionaire hadn't tried to approach her again. He walked the halls as if carrying an invisible weight, and she, from the service room, observed everything with the gaze of someone no longer surprised. It was as if a bond had been broken, not with a bang, but with the cruel delicacy of a thread slowly unraveling. Affection had turned to silence, admiration a wound, and desire a bitter memory. Still, she remained there, not for him, but for something I couldn't name. A loose thread of history that still pulled her back whenever she tried to leave. It was late one afternoon, amidst baskets of laundry and the warm scent of soap, that everything changed again. She was folding shirts in the back of the laundry room when she felt something hard inside one of the garments. It was a white shirt, fine linen, the one he wore only for important meetings. In the pocket was a note, small, folded in half, handwritten. The writing was familiar. A woman's writing, Evelyn's writing. She recognized it instantly, but the content of the note was what truly turned her world upside down. If she finds this, it's because you did it all over again. I warned you. A second. Chance isn't born of silence, it's born of courage. And if you're a coward again, I'll come back myself to get what's mine. The paper trembled between her fingers. It was Evelyn. Was it a threat, a warning, or just a pain spilling over from the past that now contaminated everything? The waitress didn't know if Evelyn had left it before or after dinner. She only knew it was there, that it was real, that Evelyn knew, and that somehow Evelyn still ruled that house, even without occupying any of the rooms. The note seemed written for him, but it had fallen into the right hands, because now she understood. Evelyn wasn't seeking revenge, she was seeking justice, and she wanted her, the maid, to bear witness to it. The feeling of being watched grew. She looked around, but there was no one. Still she felt the eyes that know, the eyes that accuse, and at the same time the eyes that ask, do something. But what? She wasn't an heiress, nor a lover, nor guilty. She was simply someone who had seen too much, but sometimes those who see too much also carry the obligation to act. That night she didn't speak to the millionaire, but she left the folded note on his pillow. No return note, no message, just the paper, like a knife left in plain sight. The next day he didn't show up for coffee or lunch. She found him hours later in his office, his back to the door, staring at an old painting on the wall, a portrait of the house before the renovation, with withered trees and a grey sky. "She's right, isn't she?" he asked without turning around. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He turned with red eyes and said, "It's not about love. It's about fear. I'm afraid of losing her. Again. And that's why I always betray her, unintentionally." The maid closed her eyes. Because in that moment she understood that she wasn't just the shadow of the dead woman, she was now also a living mirror of his mistake. And no mirror forgives when you refuse to see yourself. The next morning she found something that shouldn't have been there, an old photograph lying among the books on the shelf. It was Evelyn, with shorter hair, a tired smile, and in her arms, a child. A small boy, fair skin, dark eyes, wearing striped overalls. Time had left yellowed spots at the corners of the image, but that didn't erase what mattered most, the woman's gaze. It wasn't one of happiness, it was one of fear, protection, love, and escape. She felt a lump in her throat. She'd never seen a child in that house before, no photos, no forgotten toys, nothing. But that boy was real. And Evelyn was a mother. With trembling hands, she carried the photo to the office. He was there, sitting in the armchair, his eyes red as if he hadn't slept in days. When he saw the photo, he didn't try to hide it. He picked it up carefully, ran his thumb over the child's face and murmured, he would be 16 now. The sentence fell like a thunderclap. She took a step back. He continued, his voice hoarse. Evelyn got pregnant when everything was already falling apart. She told me the day she decided to disappear. I begged her to stay. I promised I would protect them both, but she knew her family would never allow it. And I wasn't man enough. I didn't fight for them. I let her go alone. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath. Afterwards, she sent letters, 1 or 2 a year, always without an address, just to let me know they were alive, that they were okay. The maid felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Anger grew along with a pain she couldn't even fathom. "And the boy?" she asked. He shook his head. "I never knew him. I've never seen him in person. She disappeared for good about 5 years ago. The last letter said he knew who I was, and that one day he would come looking for me." The silence that followed was filled with questions that would never be answered, because the millionaire didn't know, and deep down, he didn't even deserve to know. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she asked. "You didn't just lose a woman, you lost a son, you lost your chance to be a man." He didn't argue. He just lowered his head, because there was no argument against abandonment. What he did wasn't a mistake. It was an absence. It was giving up. And now, too late, he wanted reconciliation with a past that no longer accepted requests. That night, she locked herself in her room with the photo in her hands, and she cried. She cried for Evelyn, for that boy who grew up far from everything, for herself, for having been unknowingly part of a machine of pain. And as she looked into the eyes of the child on the paper, something inside her broke completely. Because what hurt her most wasn't what he hid, but what he let die in silence. A father who never was. A man who protected himself behind money. And a story that now surfaced like a high tide, sweeping everything away. She thought about leaving, about disappearing, just like Evelyn had. But there was something that still held her there. A detail, a doubt, a feeling that grew day by day. What if the boy was already closer than anyone imagined? The envelope arrived without a return address, without a signature, without any markings. It was lying on the back porch, as if someone knew exactly where she would find it. The maid picked it up with her fingertips, her heart racing, already anticipating that nothing inside would be simple. Opening it, she found only one sheet. A copy of the photograph of Evelyn with the boy, the exact same image she had saved, and a single sentence written in capital letters. "He knows." She ran inside, locked the door, and stared at the paper for long minutes. Who knew? The boy? Evelyn? Or someone outside? Was the note a threat or a warning? Still stunned, she decided to show it to the millionaire. He recognized the image instantly, but his reaction wasn't surprise. It was fear. "This isn't just a memory. This is a message. He's here." "Who?" she asked. "My son," he replied, his eyes lost in space. "He wrote to me a few months ago. He used a false name. He said he wanted to know the truth. I ignored him. I thought it was someone seeking money. Now I see it was a mistake." The two of them fell silent. She felt a mixture of anger and pity. The son he'd rejected now surrounded him with the precision of someone trained by pain, and he wasn't asking for recognition. He was demanding it. The next day, another envelope. This time, addressed. Directly to her. Inside 3 handwritten pages, detailing information about the mansion, schedules, employee names, old company contracts. At the end, a condition. "You know more than he thinks. Help me get in. Just one night. After that, no one gets hurt. If you don't answer me, everyone will know who you really are." Her stomach turned. The note was signed with a single letter. J. There was no direct threat, but the tone was clear. They were watching everything, including her, the maid. Hadn't slept for days. She held a key to something much greater. She could, with a gesture, return everything to Evelyn, but she also knew it wasn't that simple. That house hid too many sins to be redeemed by a single open door. That same week, the millionaire traveled to an emergency meeting, leaving her alone in the mansion. And it was there, in his absence, that the phone call came. A young, confident, male voice. "You got my note? I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want what's rightfully mine. 1 hour, 1 ticket, you choose how, or I'll let the world know what he did to my mother and to you." The maid hung up without answering. But she knew. She knew that somehow she was being thrust into the eye of the storm. She was no longer just an employee, not a shadow, not an accomplice. Now she was a coin. And maybe, if she played her cards right, she could do more than pay off old debts. She could rewrite everything. But rewriting takes courage. and she still didn't know if she had. Enough! Night fell silently. The sky was too clear, as if it wanted to witness every detail. She spent the entire day observing every corner of the mansion with a foreboding that ached in her bones. Everything was calm on the outside, but something roared within. And she knew, when the silence becomes this heavy, it's because something about to happen is already in motion. The millionaire was still out of town. The house was hers, and whatever was coming. At 3 a.m, she woke with a start. He didn't know if she'd dreamed it or if the sound she'd heard was real. A crack, a creak, maybe a whisper. She walked slowly down the stairs, barefoot, her entire body on alert. The kitchen was untouched. The windows were closed. But as she passed through the hallway downstairs, she saw something that made her stop. The door to the old basement, locked for years, the key hidden in the safe, was ajar. She had never dared go down there. The millionaire had once said they used the space as a wine cellar before the renovation, but that it had been closed off due to mold and structural risk. But now the door opened wide, an invitation and a warning. She grabbed the flashlight from the counter and descended the steps. The air down there was different, heavy, dense, and there was a metallic, cold smell, like something left in the dark too long. The beams of light cut through the dust like daggers. The peeling walls seemed to have absorbed secrets. In the left corner, a tarp covered. Something, a human shape. Her heart began to pound so loudly it drowned out the sound of the world. Her hand hesitated, but then she pulled. Beneath the tarp was a metal stretcher, and above it, nothing, emptiness. But what made her collapse was what lay beside it. A hospital tag with Evelyn's name written in pen. The plastic was still stained, as if it had been torn off in a hurry. She fell to her knees. This wasn't a memory. It was proof. Evelyn had been there, vanquished, erased, silenced. And now, missing. Her body, once supposedly hidden, was now gone. Someone took it. Someone knew. Someone returned. The maid staggered to her feet and left the basement, her heart in her throat. On the floor of the stairs, she found small footprints, fresh marks in the dust that indicated someone had been there hours before, and that paralyzed her, because she knew there was only one person with reason to return, and to remove a body before it was revealed, her own son. The next morning, the millionaire returned. She didn't tell him, she said nothing, but something about him was different, as if he knew, as if he'd sensed. They sat in the living room, facing each other, speechless, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that had never been there before. Fear, but not of scandal, of the end. Because when a body disappears, what really disappears isn't just the flesh. It's the illusion of control. It's the sign that time is up. That night she knew. The house was about to fall to ruin. And when the walls finally collapsed, there would be no innocence left among the rubble. The mansion seemed colder that morning. The open windows let in a breeze that wasn't just wind, it was omen. The millionaire ran his fingers along the walls, as if trying to feel what was still standing. But inside, everything had already collapsed. He'd avoided her gaze since he returned. Not a word about the basement. Not a question about the note, the son, or the body that was no longer there. It was as if he finally understood that he was being watched by forces he could no longer control, and she, on this side, was no longer the same. She was no longer the girl who cleaned the silver and accepted silence as her wages. She was a witness. She was a pawn. She was now part of the end. That night before retiring to his room, the millionaire asked her to bring him one last cup of tea. His voice was calm, but his tone said goodbye. She didn't argue. She carefully prepared the tray and went upstairs. When she reached her room, she found him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at something in his hands. A white sheet, the same one that had covered Evelyn that first night. He smoothed the fabric with his fingers, as if trying to erase the wrinkles of a time that would never return. That sheet, he said without looking up, was the last one you wrapped around her before you left. She approached, placed the tray on the table, and remained silent. He continued, I washed it with my own hands, I folded it, I put it away, as if by keeping it intact I could hold it here, but everything slips away. Everything slips away. His eyes were wet, but there were no tears. Only a dryness deep in the soul of someone who has lost everything and yet pretends to hold on to something. He came here, he said suddenly. She stopped. Your son? She asked. He nodded slightly. He came in while I was sleeping. He left me a letter. He said he didn't need anything. He just wanted to see in my eyes what I never had the courage to say out loud. And you said? She asked. No, he replied, because when I woke up, he was already gone, like his mother. The sheet slipped through his hands and fell to the floor. They both stared at the fabric, now dirty and wrinkled, a symbol of what he tried to preserve but which, deep down, always belonged to ruin. The next morning the maid packed her bags. She left no letter or note, just an envelope with a copy of the photograph of Evelyn and her son, the same one that had once fallen off the shelf, and inside a single sentence she had written, Some women disappear. Others return as a lesson. She left quietly, taking only what belonged to her, her story, and the certainty that she had experienced something she could never recount aloud. The millionaire was never seen again. The house remained closed for months, until one day the neighbors noticed movement. Doors open, windows wide open. A young man with dark eyes walked through the garden with a serene expression. He carried a sealed envelope in his hands, and when he reached the door, he didn't hesitate to enter. Inside, the silence welcomed him like an old acquaintance. He climbed the stairs slowly. He stopped in front of the bedroom and entered. In the center of the bed, neatly folded, lay the sheet. The same one, immaculate, as if it had been placed there that morning. The man approached. He ran his fingers over the fabric and smiled. It was as if, finally, something was complete. On the desk he found his father's letter, sealed. He didn't open it. He didn't need it anymore. He looked around and understood. There, the cycle had closed, not through reconciliation, but through awareness. Because some stories don't ask for forgiveness, just an end. Leaving the house, he locked the door with the key the maid had left hidden under the balcony planter, and before leaving, he wrote something on the window pane, fogged by the morning mist. A short, almost invisible sentence, but when you looked closely, it revealed the important point. No one sleeps in peace where love has been buried alive. And then he departed, leaving the mansion behind him, a tomb of secrets, an altar of karma, and a white sheet as the final testament to all that, even though hidden, never ceased to exist.